3 Days in Vienna by John Steinberg. This new novel is the sequel to Blue Skies over Berlin, where the main character, a young German woman called Charlotte, moves to London in 1954 under an assumed name and spends the next 50 years trying to come to terms with her past during the Nazi era. She meets Lillian, a child of the Kindertransport, who becomes her closest friend and eventually helps to allay her guilt. 3 Days in Vienna begins in the year 2000. Charlotte has died, and the story moves on to Lillian's daughter, Elizabeth. Now, with a family of her own, Elizabeth suddenly realises the need to discover her Viennese Jewish roots, but in the process finds some unpalatable truths about the established English family into which she has innocently married. The following reading by author John Steinberg is where Elizabeth has just found Charlotte's private correspondence with her lover, a former Nazi doctor. That throws everything into doubt that she thought she knew about her surrogate aunt. This kickstarts querying her own identity and, more seriously, of those closest to her.
That evening, Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, her head full of contradictory thoughts. The evening had been a complete disaster. Until now, she had usually got on reasonably well with her in-laws, so her uncharacteristic outburst was something she ascribed to having drunk too much. What was that all about? Her husband's well-spoken voice inquired from behind the crime novel he'd been pretending to read. I never realised how narrow-minded they were until now, Elizabeth said moodily. What? Just because of my father's few disparaging remarks about that Pakistani chap Mustafa? A bit of an overreaction on your part, wouldn't you say? You always told me how good Mustafa was at his job, Elizabeth retorted, turning to face the lean figure sprawled out on the king-size bed. True, but let's face it, he's hardly partner material with us. Because he doesn't quite fit the mould, you mean? An established practice like McCreary's does have to think of its reputation, you know, Anthony asserted, putting his book down to make his point. One which doesn't include anybody other than white Anglo-Saxon public schoolboys, I suppose. And a few upper-class lasses besides, Anthony said straight-faced. I'm surprised your family ever accepted me, a second-generation Austrian refugee, Elizabeth retaliated. Nonsense. You're practically as British as I am, and in any case, they adore you. Only because of the children, Elizabeth answered back. So what's brought all this on? You've been acting really strangely since you got back this evening, cutting it very fine, I might add. I'm sorry. It's just that I found going to Charlotte's flat really traumatic. Elizabeth would have liked to share the experience with her husband of 20 years, but knew she couldn't. Even after all this time, there was still so much they were unable to communicate to each other. I understand, Anthony said, reaching out to his wife. Accepting the invitation, Elizabeth moved over to lie beside him. Perhaps I didn't behave particularly well, she sighed. I'll ring your mother when they get back from France and apologise. Otherwise, they'd have every right to reconsider letting us use the villa in Antibes again this summer. I shouldn't worry. They'll have forgotten all about it by then. And anyway, they'll probably end up cancelling the trip. Dad's political commitments are taking up most of his time. He hardly comes into the office at all these days.
John now reads a second extract from 3 Days in Vienna that shows the true extent of the dangerous views held by Elizabeth's bigoted father-in-law, already well on the way to being transformed into a credible political force.
Over in the pretty rural setting of Bourton-on-the-Water in the Cotswolds, a meeting of the British Independence Party was about to commence. A robust man in his early 60s got to his feet, called for silence, and began to address the select group, which consisted in the main of 30 or so like-minded politicians and captains of industry. Good morning, gentlemen. I'm sure some of you need to get to London for the afternoon's vote in the Commons, so I'll keep it brief. Though, if it were up to me, I'd lock them all up and throw away the key. Cutting the age of consent for homosexuals. Whatever next, he bellowed. The comment brought subdued mutterings of approval. As your treasurer, William McCreary continued, I can confirm that as of last night, contributions pledged have passed the £3 million mark. That is correct, isn't it, Rupert? He addressed the obese financier with a black eye patch who sat to his right. The relationship with Meredith's bank went back over 40 years. Of course he was aware of the controversy surrounding the bank's dealings with so-called German war criminals, fugitives living in South America, but that had proved no more than a temporary blot on their reputation, and they were soon able to resume their rightful position among the city's elite institutions. More importantly, Meredith remained resolutely supportive of the BIP's cause and shared its nationalistic aspirations. Quite so, and we're happy to match that sum, with certain provisos, of course, the old banker croaked, appearing to have great difficulty in staying awake. So we are now more than able to field sufficient candidates to fight next year's general election, McCreary resumed. I'm also delighted to announce, as of this morning, the signing of the lease of our offices at 18 St James's Street. Spontaneous applause broke out around the original Tudor drawing room. William McCreary smiled with satisfaction, knowing he was one step nearer to achieving his objective of holding the balance of power at next year's general election. Naturally, the BNP would side with the Conservatives, many of whom shared their policies, but their allegiance wouldn't come cheap. Glancing at the bust in the corner of his hero Oswald Mosley, William liked it when things went according to plan. He knew he was taking a chance putting his son Anthony in charge of the firm that he'd run single-handedly all these years. But this would leave him free to pursue his secret ambition to change the face of British politics.